Charlie Echeverry is an expert in the area of digital and social monetization, business development, brand strategy, go-to-market, and organizational design. As the founder of Black Brown Collective, the most interesting element of his concept is that he and his partners are focused on supporting businesses targeting the Black and Brown youth in America.
Black Brown Collective is a strategic advisory. It's a management consulting category type of business, and very focused on obviously what's been a big part of my career, and that is connecting with consumers, but bearing in mind the fact that consumers in America are dramatically different today than they were. The last 30, 40 years have been dramatic in terms of the demographic changes that have happened.
Let's get ready for this fascinating conversation with Charlie and his perception of what's next in business at the intersection of emerging platforms and audiences.
Éxito.
Success.
Hábitos.
Habits.
¿Cómo lo hizo?
How do they make it?
Descubra las costumbres y secretos de los triunfadores.
Discover the habits and the secrets of those who have succeeded.
Charlie, thank you for being with us in ComoLoHizo.
Thank you for having me, Fernando. Appreciate it.
So, you know what the elevator pitch is?
Yeah, of course.
You don't need to sell anything because you're a very successful guy. But let's say that you are in the elevator and you have to present your project, Black and Brown. And how could you do it?
So I would say, and that's actually a great question. I would answer very simply, if it's an elevator kind of scenario, that Black Brown is a business accelerator where diversity and digital meet. That's how I would very simply say it, because you only have 10, 15 seconds to say it. If I got a chance to ride some few floors down further with the person, I would elaborate that the basis of that business is really to help companies map the future, because the future in this country is about understanding how demographics have changed and how the platforms to communicate with consumers have changed.
So your business, Black and Brown, is for individuals or for corporations, companies?
So it's for companies, for brands and companies. And Black Brown Collective is a strategic advisory. It's a management consulting category type of business, and very focused on obviously what's been a big part of my career, and that is connecting with consumers, but bearing in mind the fact that consumers in America are dramatically different today than they were years ago. And so,
how many years ago?
Well, I mean, we've been a country of immigrants for a very long time, but I think in terms of critical mass, certainly the last, 40, 50 years in particular, and it tends to accelerate as we get closer to the present. But I would say, the last, 30, 40 years have been dramatic in terms of the demographic changes that have happened from an ethnic standpoint primarily, but in a variety of other ways too.
Yeah, and that has a great impact in any business, correct? From
Absolutely.
Restaurants, laundry, whatever, or the big business,
it's such
truck companies, whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such a great point because, again, if the thesis of my business is that you need to better understand how consumers have changed and the platforms that they use have changed, then that message is applicable to any business, not just the media companies and businesses that I came from in my career, but to your point, a restaurant, a dry cleaner. And you see examples of this. I was in a little bit of a cafe in Playa Vista recently. Playa Vista, for those of you who may not live in the LA area, it tends to be, they call it Silicon Beach. It's a very kind of tech-friendly area, and a very, affluent area, frankly. And so I went to this cafe that was basically like a coffee shop, but in the corner of their refrigerator were jarritos, right? The Mexican soda. And I was thinking to myself, that's just one little baby example of what it means to understand who your consumer might be, and play to those things. I don't think you would have seen jarritos there 5 years ago in a place like that. So it's a good example.
How do you assess the change? Like, what's the main difference between the market 10 years ago or 15 years ago and now?
It's such a great question. Well, and I think it depends by what you mean by the market, right? So from my standpoint, given my background and my career, it's been in media, advertising, really content, creating and connecting with audiences. And over the last 12 or 13 years, audiences that are disproportionately Latino or multicultural. And so in that world, I think the opportunity has changed dramatically in the last 10 or 15 years at a very strategic level. And this is what I mean. For many, many years, the idea of Latino audiences, Hispanic audiences had been an end of funnel conversation. What I mean by that is that it was all about targeting or creating a product and saying, how do we sell this product to Latinos? Because there's a lot of them. Or how do we translate something and make it available to them? So it was always an end of funnel conversation. Where I think the opportunity has increased and become much more significant is at the top of that funnel, at the level of strategy, at the level of idea, at the level of product. I mean, it's not just an execution at the very bottom, but how do we actually help, based on insights from these audiences, create whole new things, whole new types of content, whole new experiences and products, and not just be limited to targeting a user at the very end of the funnel after we've thought about everything already. I think that's been the big change, is going up funnel.
It's so interesting. Now, you talk fast and you talk, I know,
you
great.
told me to be exciting.
No, I mean, I love it. But so many things that I want to ask you, and
Please.
I don't want to interrupt you at the same time. But okay, so let's say I'm a restaurant owner.
Sure.
How do I identify what's my target and what kind of people I want to be serving? How do I go through the process? Shall I sit? Shall I talk to someone? Shall I go out and ask?
I mean, this is also another part that I think is interesting about the journey that we've been on, at least in Hispanic communications, let's say broadly speaking, is that, sometimes the industry has led us to forget some things that are fundamental and should have probably never been forgotten. And by that, I mean, to answer your question, the very first thing that I would do if I was a restaurant owner is understand who my customer was. Who is my customer, the desired customer that I want? Who is my addressable audience, the person who I want to actually reach, and try to understand everything that I could about what makes that audience.
How do you do that?
You ask them, you go meet them, you interact with them. I mean, there's all different kinds of market research and things that you can do, but if I was opening up a restaurant, I would actually want to go and canvass the area, understand who the people are that live there, assuming the people aren't going to be driving a great distance to get to me, and understand what makes them tick. And here's the key for me, is not just understanding who they are and sort of understanding a sketch of who they are demographically and their background, but also trying to find some untold truth about that audience. That's what, in the marketing business we call an insight. What is the insight? What's the untold thing that isn't going to be readable in sort of, stats and charts that can help me really understand, how to make an audience? I can give you one example.
Sure.
if you want to hear one.
Please.
So like many families throughout the country taking part in this kind of share economy that we now have, we have a back part of our house, a guest house, that we sometimes will put on Airbnb in my own personal home. I live in a neighborhood called Loyola Village, which is not too far from Loyola Marymount University. My wife and I were thinking about, well, what makes people want to book our place among the many millions of, potential options in LA to stay for a night or for 2 nights. And what we hit upon was that there was one distinct consumer insight that we uncovered that nobody told us, but that we knew was a key to how we would market this Airbnb. And that is that a lot of parents, before they send their kids off to college, they come for a weekend visit. And they want to stay close to, the university in a place that's within walking distance. And the entire purpose of it is to make sure that their kid goes off to school and that they get a chance to visit and look at things. So we designed basically all the little the marketing you can do on Airbnb, and even the way that we stock and we prepare the place with that consumer in mind. So, with a map of the campus, if you want to see what's where, all those little things are based on really understanding your consumer at a deep level and trying to create an experience for them.
So, okay, great. Now I have another question.
Yes.
So you've been working in traditional media also, correct? Traditional
Correct.
media, TV, radio, what we know, and then digital media came up.
Yes.
First the internet and
Yes.
then social platforms.
Correct.
And that's actually something that always is a reason of concern for any entrepreneur. The transition.
Mm-hmm.
How do I handle, how important is social media? Is there a way that I can avoid it, or is unavoidable for sure? So
What's
how
my
do
point
we,
of view on that?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that, my background, I have worked at big media companies, Disney, Univision, but I've always worked in a digital capacity. So I've lived within these big media ecosystems, but always very focused on digital, social, and emerging platforms. That's been my background.
But those platforms are new.
They are. They're relatively new. Absolutely. And so, I think part of it is, what digital and social have done is they've necessitated in consumers and in marketers and in executives the need to stay up to speed and up to date on things as they evolve. There's no question about that, because it used to be, when I got started in my career, TV did this, radio did this, outdoor did this. It was, of course there was changes, but for the most part, things had remained for decades the way that they are. And then here comes this, internet. And then from that, everything begins to splinter and the rules change. And so part of it is just having an external orientation. I think that's good for really anybody, but especially if you're an entrepreneur, having an orientation to the outside, to what's going on in the world. That's what leads to things like networking and wanting to connect with people and to learn. So being very open. I think that caught a lot of the media world by surprise, because the orientation was much more insular. It was much more closed. It was about being inside and not necessarily sitting down with potentially your competitor to learn about what's going on. That was completely taboo. When I worked at Univision, it was unthinkable to sit down with Telemundo to have a conversation. What the digital and social ecosystem taught us is that you can have, trade associations and go to conferences and take the person who has your position out to lunch once a month and learn what he's seeing. It was a completely different kind of economy around this idea of frenemies or co-opetition, whatever you want to call it. But I think that external orientation is something that helps you understand how to make sense of all this stuff. And in terms of its importance, absolutely. It is critically important to communicate with consumers where they are.
Right. Do you think that the tactics to launch a business today are the same as some years ago?
Well, certainly not in the area of communication. There's no question about it. I think, it's become, it's a lot easier, and it's in some ways more difficult to be an entrepreneur today. Where it's easier is there's been a great democratization of the things that used to be institutional, right? So if you want to create content for the purposes of your business, it's very easy to do. If you want to distribute that content on a global scale, you can basically do it in a moment's notice. So there's been a great democratization. Here we are in a studio recording this podcast. It's basically technology that wasn't around. So clearly there's advantages. But I also think that there's other challenges that didn't exist. And some of the challenges are around the fact that, there's such specialization. There's so many options for so many variety of different things that the idea of your message and what it is that your business does and what you can uniquely do that nobody else can has become much more important and critical to get right.
Now, honesty.
Yes.
That's a problem in social media.
Yes.
How to be honest and human and get results. Mm-hmm. Because most of what we see in social media, I personally am scared of, because it's scaring, not afraid, but, what mm-hmm. is this? What is this? Scam? Is this, you see a beautiful dress and then your wife gets the dress and then it's like, what? This is not what was in the picture.
Right.
So how to be honest, how to get to that emotional relevance and connection with the potential or prospective client.
Yeah. I think that, you have to look at social as a means of delivery, right? Not an end in itself. It's a way to get a message out. You still have to work to craft what is an authentic message and to realize the opportunities and limitations of all of these different platforms, because they have them. There are some, I recently did a little grid, a kind of a mental exercise of all the platforms that we know of: YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram. And I tried to reduce the purpose of each of those platforms to one word. I tried to bring down to one word, what did each one mean? And so, for instance, Instagram was persona. It's your public persona. That's how you publish to the world what you want the world to believe about you. That's persona for Instagram. And they might disagree with me, but that's the way that I broke it down, right? Something like Facebook is family. And Facebook is also a key to get into other applications, because if you've ever downloaded an app, you know that the very first thing they say is, do you want to sign in using your Facebook account? Because they know everyone has one. So now the younger kids they get Facebook accounts just because it's a key to be able to quickly download other applications. So understanding what each of these platforms is for and how the consumers see it is a very important step to make sure that your message on that platform is authentic and real. So for example, if we know that Instagram is about the persona that you have and you're trying to use it to deliver, I don't know, maybe like heavy duty sell messaging to your customers,